So good evening and welcome to Imperial Lates Online Wellbeing, the latest in our public event series exploring research at Imperial College London. My name's Hayley and I'm a science writer at Imperial covering all things natural sciences. This week there's a whole programme of events on wellbeing exploring how science is helping us understand and improve our mental and physical health and to embrace what is truly good for us. Now, since the clocks changed in the UK this weekend, the evenings are already getting darker and soon the mornings will draw in too. And how are you feeling about this prospect? We have a Mentimeter poll where you can let us know. So let us know in just a word or a few words how you're feeling about this winter. We'll check in the results a bit later. The link should be in the chat for you now. So let us know about that. Now, this winter, of course, we face extra challenges in the form of further lockdowns and the prospect of a cancelled Christmas. But never fear, our panel of experts are here to share their winter wellness tips for the next hour. Drawing on the different disciplines of psychology, psychiatry and neuroscience, we'll explore how we can prepare ourselves for a winter lockdown, prioritise our mental well-being by improving our mood, sleep and wintertime mindset. And before I introduce our speakers, I would like to remind everyone watching at home that this is an interactive event, so please do send us your questions and thoughts. One of our team is working away in the background, monitoring the YouTube chat, and will be passing on your questions and comments for me to read out or put to our guests. Please can I just remind everyone to be considerate of others when you're posting in the live chat, and we'll all have a lovely time. Now, let's meet our speakers. First up is Kari Leibowitz, who took the question of winter wellness to the extreme by living for a year in Tromsø in Norway, which is 200 miles north of the Arctic Circle and where the sun doesn't rise for 3 months of the year. She is completing a PhD at Stanford University in shaping mindsets, which she has applied to doctor-patient relationships, the placebo effect, and of course, embracing winter. Welcome, Kari.
Thanks so much. Great to be here.
Great. So next up, we have Dr. Martina de Simplicio, who once worked with the Menagerie Theatre Company on a play inspired by how mental images can amplify our mood. She is a clinical senior lecturer in psychiatry here at Imperial, focusing on mood instability and positive behaviour change, including how to help us stay motivated. So welcome, Martina.
Hi, everyone.
And last but certainly not least, we have Izu Yu, whose questions about his own sleep issues led him to form the Sleep Imperial Society while he was studying here, and now the International Sleep Charity, which brings together sleep enthusiasts around the world. His research looks at the molecular mechanisms of sleep, including how it can go wrong in diseases like Alzheimer's. He's very interested in how we can improve our sleep, and I'm a particular fan of advice on taking lunchtime naps. So welcome, Izu.
Thank you.
Great. Now, before we get into the questions, let's have a look at that poll. How are people feeling about the upcoming winter? Scared, anxious, apprehensive, cold, certainly. Nervous, sad, tired, yes. So a lot of quite negative emotions, which I'm sure can be expected, but what can we do about it? So the first question I'd like to put to our speakers is, why do we tend to respond to even normal winters with dread? And what can we do to prioritise our well-being at this time? Kari, I'll come to you first.
So I think that we naturally have this association between dark as being bad and light as being good. And the winter is a darker time of year. And I think, you know, the words that we're seeing right now are not just sort of normal wintertime anxiety that might be there, but of course they're compounded by coronavirus and the pandemic and all of this uncertainty around the future. And so it can make this darkness feel especially dark and overwhelming. But my research shows that that's just one way of viewing the darkness. And actually, there are a lot of things we can do to make the darkness not feel scary and oppressive, but sort of cozy and welcoming and peaceful. And so I'm excited to be sharing some of that with you all today.
Thank you. Martina, any thoughts?
Well, I'll follow on from Kari saying that I think it has a lot to do with what we anticipate. So we might have memories, or we might have a shared vision that the winter maybe is a bit scary. Maybe that has an evolutionary background. It's kind of safe to be a bit scared at a time when probably there are not as many resources there for us. So to, snuggle in. But I'm going to bring in the fact that these anticipations are also what we would call cognitive biases. So little distortions that our mind plays for us. And so if you have a bad memory, that means that you focus on all the things in your environment that will feed into that negative distortion. But you can also change those. So you can also try and change those biases, and a bit like Carrie already said, learn to think differently and expect differently the winter and the dark.
Great. So, Izu, how do you feel about this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really surprised myself neither. But I think if we look at the biology, there's some really some interesting changes that happen in our system, in our body, during the winter, and some of this might influence our mood as well. And then we expect these changes, as Martina mentioned. And we get not a so great experience from it. So that might be an issue as well.
So it's all a bit intimidating, but there are things that we can do. And now we're talking about this winter as well in the context of lockdowns. And obviously in the first lockdown in the spring, one thing that people did was create goals and a lot of personal goal setting. So I wondered if you had any thoughts about whether these are a helpful tool, or are there situations where that might actually get in the way of helping us out? Martina, I wondered if you had some thoughts on that.
Yeah, so goals are a very powerful thing. They can help us get to somewhere where we want. But I think a challenge is always balancing goals, especially right now, with being a little bit self-compassionate. So we need to have like SMART goals, which is a catchy phrase. And that means, I sometimes summarize it as, is it a goal that you can imagine happening, let's say, not in next year, but in a week time or in a month time? So something that is there, it's within your reach, and also something that you're able to, let go and forgive yourself if you can't really get there. That way they don't become a pressure, but they become a resource.
Yeah, I'd like to build on that. I think, there was this idea at the beginning of the pandemic when we were all home and we felt like, oh, we're home, we have so much time. And there was this idea that we're all going to get, in really good shape, or we're going to write our best-selling novels. And it quickly became clear that that was kind of garbage nonsense, that now is a really hard time to get things done. And so, to follow up on what Martina was saying, I think it could be really useful to set goals that are self-compassionate. So if your goal is related to exercise or activity, start small. Say that your goal is to take a walk every day, either at lunchtime if you like to go during the day, or when you finish work if you like to go when it's dark out. Set a goal to read a fun book that you've had sitting on your shelf for a while. Set a goal to just enjoy and allow yourself to binge watch that new TV show. Don't make these goals sort of not fit the situation and the context that we're in of this global pandemic. Make goals that really are going to make this feel like a time where you're sort of living happily and sort of being your best self and thriving, given the circumstances that we're all in.
Yeah, and those circumstances are working from home with friends. It's interesting. So for people who do want to set goals, and they might be quite lofty goals in some ways, but maybe small and achievable, how can they keep up the motivation? Now, Martina, I know that you've done some work with mental imagery and motivation.
Yeah, so first of all, mental imagery is when we picture something in our mind's eye, but also mental imagery is multi-sensory. So if you hum a tune in your head, that's also mental imagery. And we know that when we imagine something, it's more likely for us to actually do it. So there is a study done more than 10 years ago where actually people were asked to imagine in the US going to the polls and vote, compared to another group that wasn't asked to do that. And then they looked at how likely the two groups were to actually go and vote. And those who had imagined it went and voted, were more than those who didn't. So that might be quite timely right now, but it kind of shows, and there's many other studies showing that imagining something will help you get there. And that's because, well, what we know from the brain is that the brain kind of simulates the action that you're imagining. So we see light up actually the motor cortices of the brain if you imagine an action. But we also know that when you imagine something, you really pre-experience it. So if your goal is something that you will enjoy and that's rewarding, imagining how rewarding it will be will make it feel that you want it more. And so will potentially help you get there. And when you imagine, you can also imagine the challenges. So, if you want to get to somewhere and you imagine, going for that walk, going for that run, but in your mental picture, something else happens, that will tell you, oh, actually, maybe that isn't really a good idea. So it's a really powerful tool. And if people are interested, if anybody has some questions on, we can talk about even clinical studies where we're using this for kind of difficult behavior change.
We had an interesting question in from YouTube, actually, on kind of that note where, at the moment we're spending a lot more time in our heads, actually, and it might be mental imagery, but it might not necessarily be positive mental imagery. So Salve from YouTube says, what advice do you have for feeling like a failure or have low self-esteem when you're in your head all your time at home?
I think what I would say is that's one of those cognitive biases. It's your head, your attention has made you spin just to the negative. Ask a friend, ask a person, actually one thing that counteracts that, a memory, something that they will know that actually proves that you're not a failure. And then whenever that failure thought comes in, bring to mind the image of that memory that your friend suggested. That can be one of the tricks. And thinking in imagery is often more powerful than thinking like we speak in verbal thoughts. So if you have a strong positive image, you can try and use it to counteract those negative thoughts.
Now, thinking about winter specifically, we've had another interesting question from YouTube from EE9CLH, catchy. So what is the reason for winter having an effect on people's mood? Is there a scientific explanation of it? Is it due to lack of exposure to sun or due to cold or wet weather? Isu, I don't know if you have any insights of that from sleep and circadian rhythms.
Yeah. So we surely don't, or at least not to my knowledge, we surely don't have a comprehensive answer to the mechanism by which winter affects people's mood. But what we currently know or have some idea on is that the sunlight when you wake up, for example, is a really nice Zeitgeber. It's a cue that gives basically your brain to start working. And then in the winter there's more darkness, and for example that might influence people's mood. So that is just one small explanation. But in research studies, this is still an area of current investigation. And in recent studies, many people has shown that our biology changes during the winter, and maybe you can take that observation with a bit of salt, but it does seem to change in terms of our immune system, and our behavior seems to change. And then these changes are quite interesting, and surely our sleep is affected.
I think it's interesting the way that some of these biological changes can interact with our psychology and sort of our expectations of what we associate with winter. And I think, if we all accepted that we were going to be a little more tired in the winter, maybe it wouldn't bother us so much. Maybe we would just see this as part of the natural yearly cycle. And that's what I noticed about a lot of people living above the Arctic in Norway, is they were more tired in the winter, but they didn't see that as a huge problem. They just saw that as sort of adapting and shifting with the seasons, and that winter is a time to sort of hibernate a little bit and sleep a little more, and summer is a time to be more active and more energetic. And so I think it's interesting the way we can have difficulties when our psychology and our expectations are fighting with our biology like that, where we're trying to just go about our normal days even as the clocks have changed, with no adjustment or sort of no compassion for ourselves that this week we might need a little bit more sleep, or we might tend to feel a little bit more tired. If we expected that would be the case and sort of prepared for it and leaned into it, then maybe we would experience that tiredness differently as sort of a healthy thing that is us adapting to the cycles of nature.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that actually, because obviously if there are these actual biological effects, with 3 months of darkness, that's quite a hit for people. But how did they enjoy winter? Because I know you said that they actually do sort of look forward to it, and they have a different kind of mindset about winter.
So I think that people in Norway see winter as full of opportunity. And I think a lot of us are used to seeing the winter as a really limiting time of year. I mean, certainly I grew up by the beach in New Jersey, and winter was a time of year where we couldn't go to the beach. And so it was easy to focus on what we were sort of losing or missing in the winter. And I wasn't really paying attention to as many of the things that I liked about the winter, like the fact that it allowed me to be a homebody and sit at home all day on Saturday and read a book without feeling guilty for not being out on a hike enjoying the sunshine, but I never really sort of thanked winter for giving me that opportunity. And so I think really seeing winter as an opportunity and looking for those things that it does afford us is sort of one way to shift our wintertime mindset and sort of adapt to the winter. And then people there do have, more practical strategies. So people often do use sun lamps. Actually, at the University of Tromsø, there's a light cafe where students could go and sit in front of the sun lamps. And I'm very much not a morning person, so that's actually something I use to help myself wake up in the morning, even when it's still kind of light outside. And so there are these practical strategies that people use, but people are seeing them sort of in conjunction with all of these other opportunities that winter affords for coziness indoors or winter recreation, like sort of walks in the snow or cross-country skiing outdoors.
It's that Danish thing of huggy, isn't it, where you sort of want to be all warm and cozy inside.
Yeah, in Norwegian, it's kuselig. It's the same concept, and it's this coziness that's not just sort of physical, but also psychological, that you're sort of content and at peace.
No, I mean, that all sounds very cozy, but of course we still do actually have to work as well. And many of us from home, and working from home and the winter has disrupted many of ours' normal schedule. So how important is it, do you think, for people to keep a schedule in the winter? Izu, I wondered if you had any thoughts about that in terms of people's sleep as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the winter, it's best to keep a regular schedule, because we know that from many studies, again, that if you have a disrupted schedule, such as if you're a sleep worker, if you're working as a shift worker, for example, and you have a disrupted schedule, that can bring many physiological issues to, for example, your body. And so it's really important to maintain a good schedule and to sleep at a regular time, and to, most importantly, to wake up at a regular time, and to try as much as you can to follow this. And sometimes this can be a bit challenging.
Definitely. Martina, I don't know if you had any thoughts about that with keeping people motivated, like we were talking about earlier, whether it's important to schedule things.
Yeah, so for example, I work as a clinician, so when you work with, for example, in clinical depression, and a number of people have said that they feel like maybe not depressed, but a bit blue in the winter. So we can extrapolate that. One of the first things that we do, and it's part of what's called behavioral activation, is ask people to have a little diary where they will schedule, literally starting from small things, like small things that you put every day in your routine, and that's your small goal for the day. And it's one really important trick to that is not to just have the shoulds in your diary and in your routine. So do not just put, want to get up by this time and want to go and do that bit. That's a should or that's a chore. But also have one small thing that is nice. And that can be anything, the smallest, most apparently trivial thing. And another trick is to then go back and go like, oh, how much did I enjoy, having that shower for 5 minutes longer, or, going on a little detour when I did my pick up from nursery and enjoying that freedom of 5 minutes more of a walk, anything like that, and kind of rewarding yourself. That was rewarding, that was good. And that reinforces again that the motivation to do it again in the next day.
If I can just add on your point, Martina, I think those things that helps with your adrenaline and keeps you happy are very, very important, especially during winter when you get less sunlight, less interactions because of the weather, for example. So it's good, for example, to go for a run. To do some exercise at home as well, so to get some fresh air, to change your environment a little bit. That might help.
Yeah, that's interesting actually, because obviously we've had a lot of questions in about light in the winter and whether it's good to exercise at lunchtime, which I'm sure you guys would agree with is a good idea. But also, are there other ways we can make up for the lack of light? Carrie, you mentioned lamps. Are these sort of sad lamps a good idea, perhaps to help wake you up as well, easier? Or can we take vitamin D, for example? Do these things help with the lack of light? Sorry, Carrie, maybe I should.
No, Yizu, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So if I can just mention the lamps, I'm a big fan of those lamps that the lamps that use blue lights to gradually wake you up, and as well as some apps now that you can have on your computer to basically make to block the blue light from a little bit, at least, from your screen. I think those things are quite useful in terms of because blue light, basically a little bit of blue light will for the lack of to simplify this, will kick off your neurons and make some of the neurons fire. So those things I think are quite helpful.
I think we often focus a lot on, ways we can use lights and lamps to sort of compensate for the darkness. And I think that's really helpful, especially when you're sort of like, it's 9 a.m. on a Monday and you're like trying to get yourself into work mode. But I also think we can think about how we can use light deliberately to complement the darkness. So one thing that they do a lot in Norway and across Scandinavia is using fire to celebrate the darkness. So people like to gather either outdoors over a bonfire, even school children. My friend Ida tells me about how her 3rd grade daughter gets asked once or twice a month to bring a log to school in her backpack so that the children can make a bonfire with a log from each child and hang out around the bonfire outside at school. And people do that in their backyards or when they're camping. And then also in their homes, if people have fireplaces, they have the fireplaces going. If they don't have that, they have a lot of candles lit. And it's not, it's very different than in the US, where people tend to have all the lights on to sort of compensate for the darkness in the winter. There in Norway, they really like to sort of adapt and sort of live with the darkness by keeping the lights soft, especially, in the evening or on weekends, or even I've been to meetings in Norway where we lit candles at the meeting in the middle of the day and sort of embrace that soft, cozy lighting, so that rather than saying, oh, it's dark outside, we have to make it so bright so that it feels different, saying this is the dark time and we're going to sort of lean into that and enjoy that sort of soft kind of light and complement that indoors as well.
That's really lovely. And I just see we've got a fun tip in from YouTube from Abby, who said that for activities, add silly movements to your day. So she says she started doing a dance while the kettle boils. It lifts moods and gets the blood flowing, and no one watching, so it doesn't matter that you can't dance. That sounds pretty fun. And but today, I went for a walk today, even though it was raining, and I slipped in some mud and put my hand in a bramble, and I felt gross, but I could just come home and change. It's not like I had to go to a meeting covered in mud. So actually working from home has these kind of benefits where you can kind of embrace the silly, messy side of life a little bit more, I think. But, we've had some questions in as well about this sort of working from home as a concept that also means that in winter we're more tired when we're doing this. And, on top of Zoom fatigue that we all have felt at this time anyway, there's also the darkness and the winter. So how can we combat tiredness? Perhaps Izu, is it a matter of getting enough hours of sleep?
So getting so the number of sleep, the number of the quantity of sleep in terms of hours is a bit variable for each people, and it's not there shouldn't be a guidance. At least I don't really think that there should be a guidance on how many hours exactly you should sleep. I think as long as you feel happy, as long as you feel refreshed after you sleep, that's like how you feel, I think, is the most important aspect, is the most important thing about your sleep. And yeah, so that's the most important thing about your sleep, is basically how you feel about your sleep. And if you don't feel completely refreshed, then maybe you can think of some things that you can do to be able to sleep a bit better. So quantity is not perhaps the main thing. Maybe we can also think about quality to get quality sleep. I think that's really, really important as well, and that's a bit harder. Yeah.
We've got a question in actually from Carol on YouTube who says, are naps a good idea in winter? They're so tempting when it's cold out, but are naps helpful?
I don't know the science behind this one. That would be
Sorry,
more.
So if I can.
I'll just
sorry.
say,
can I help with this question?
Sorry, Izu, you're a bit behind, but if we pause
Yeah.
for a second, I'm sure we can let you come in.
Yeah, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, yeah. So if I can just answer the question regarding the nap, I think they are really good. So basically, a study from some colleagues in Singapore basically showed that if you have to have, for example, 5 hours of sleep, which is usually what people considers as very short duration of sleep, then if you nap during the day at around lunchtime, that really helps with your performance, your cognitive performance. And from a study that I led at Sleep Imperial, we found out that the effect of poor sleep, of sleeping only a few hours per day, people tend to feel, and that's entirely subjective, based on our questionnaire, they tend to feel more the impact during the afternoon. So really, a nap. I think I'm a big believer in naps.
Sounds good to me. Carrie, I think you wanted to add something.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm quite pro nap, and I think the key behind these things is to do them with intention, right? So this goes sort of back to what Martina was saying about sort of reflecting on what was rewarding and really being sort of mindful and deliberate. And I think, we've all had that experience, or at least I have, where I'm like, I'm going to lay down for just 10 minutes. And then an hour later, I wake up and I just feel horrible about having taken such a long nap. And so I think, this comes back to this idea of self-compassion and adapting to the winter, of giving yourself that freedom and that permission of, if you need to take a nap, really indulge in that nap. And I think, that speaks to Yizu's point about how we can, chase quality in addition to quantity, and sort of giving yourself that freedom to have a deep sleep can be an important part of that experience. And so my advice is, if you're going to nap, really lean into that nap, like turn the lights off and really go for it.
Sounds good to me. It kind of makes me think, Martina, that there must sort of be a balance that we have to try and strike between self-care and also doing our work, as it were, and doing the things that get us through the day. So do you have any thoughts about that, about how we can make sure that we're still doing the things we need to do, so that self-care doesn't become destructive at this time?
That's true. It's a really key question. It's like cracking the code. I think and I would add to the mix something which in a way makes it even more difficult now, which is maybe some of the things that are usually part of our self-care, we can't do them, or we feel that we can't do them as usual. It might be socializing in a certain way, or seeing certain people, and that feels like then we're stuck. Or another key thing is that we just don't know. So there's a lot of uncertainty. And we know from, again, sort of psychology studies that uncertainty is a lot linked with anxiety, and that can drive our mood going up and down. And again, then this balancing that you're talking about becomes even more difficult. So I think right now, to keep the balance, maybe a good idea is just to, go back to the basics. What do you know that is good for yourself, and treat things like a small experiment. So, to have a productive day, but also maybe, spend 1 hour in the week doing something that's nice. What can I change in my routine that makes it work? If I wake up half an hour later so that I indulge a bit more, or if I take a break at that point. Everything is very uncertain and very messy now. So why don't we use it as an experiment? Why do we let's allow ourselves to test things out? And as I'm an Imagery fan, as you heard before, add that into the mix. If you can't get something, you can maybe try and remind yourself of how it will be, I don't know, next year when we won't be in lockdown. Bring that good memory. This is not forever. Use your imagination to sort of bring closer things that might not be so close right now.
Yeah, and that kind of reminds me of a question we had on the Eventbrite sign up before this started. So Lauren asked, how do you prepare your mindset and emotions during this time with so many confusing government guidelines that are constantly changing? So this question of uncertainty again. I don't know if you have anything more about like what we can do when we really don't know what's going to happen next week.
I kind of go back to so the flip side of Imagery is that, as anything, you can use that too much, right? So if you're uncertain and you start imagining all the possible scenarios, then that's not a good way of, for example, imagining things. So we can't anticipate things. Let's try and let them go. And if we find ourselves actually starting to worry a lot and trying to guess what will be in one way and what will be in another way and the other, again, I'm going to use one of the examples that I have from my clinical work. Sometimes when that happens, I tell my patients, well, put all those images and thoughts in a balloon, let the balloon go and pop it. It might sound really silly and simplistic, but I would, challenge all of us to try a little bit of these cognitive techniques, because they actually can work. If we can't control something, can we visualize letting it go? And by practicing it, actually it does work a little bit.
Yeah, and I think focusing on what we can control is really helpful right now. So, I know that it's a time of year when a lot of us might not be able to be with our loved ones over the holidays, and that can be really hard for people. I know it's hard for me. I live on the opposite side of the country as my family. And I think that there's sort of two things you can do is one, you can say, all right, given this situation that nobody wants to be in, are there any opportunities? Is there any even minute silver lining? And, for me, it's a huge bummer. I spend every year Thanksgiving with my family, and I won't be able to do that this year. But traveling around the holidays is madness. And I'm kind of excited to not have to get on an airplane and do that whole craziness that I usually do every year. And not to say that it's not worth it or that I wouldn't rather be with my family, but given these so many things that are out of control, can I focus on one or few opportunities that the situation affords? Can I focus on some things that might be benefits? And then with that in mind, what can you control that's aligned with these values? So I care about not being able to go home for the holidays because I love my family and I want my connection to them to be strong. So maybe I can be setting up more regular Zoom hangouts with them, or maybe I can be sending them small gifts or writing them letters in the mail, or maybe I can be doing other things that help me feel connected to my family and my community that might not be a great substitute for not actually being with my family on the holiday, but at least are aligned with the values that are at the heart of the stress and worry and sadness and anxiety I feel about the current situation.
That's really good advice. Thank you. Now, thinking about things that we might be able to control, just to kind of go back to sleep, we have a question here from Rashma from the YouTube. Said, so maybe Izu, can you explain what is good quality sleep and how can we achieve this? How can we control our sleep to be better at this time?
Sleep is, I think, what I try to explain. So there's some objective measures of good quality sleep, but I think the most important thing is your feeling. Whether you feel I can achieve this is basically. I'm sure that Martina might be a better expert than me on this, but is really to prepare your mindset, to prepare your brain to sleep. So just to be aware of the time, to be conscious that you will be sleeping, for example, in an hour, in 2 hours, and then to prepare. Sometimes you wake up during a bad phase of your sleep, so you have different phases of sleep. If we can simplify it that way, sometimes you have to wake up unfortunately because of some commitments during your deep sleep, and if that's the case, then it's really important to get a bit of a regime going on to follow that little schedule that will help you feel, for example, as Carrie mentioned before, achieved. That will make you feel good. For example, if you didn't used to have breakfast, you can have breakfast in the morning, and then maybe you'll feel very very quite good in the morning. So you feel that at least you've achieved something in the morning, which is always a good feeling, and then you're set for the day.
Yeah, I guess some of the things I was just thinking, we were mentioning what's the best time to exercise, and just tying it into the quality sleep. For example, one of the things that we know is that usually it doesn't help if you exercise intensely very close to when you go to sleep. But going for a walk, say mid-afternoon or early evening, is actually helpful for getting a good sleep. So that also goes back. Maybe you won't get the daylight, but you might sort of get your body to that a little bit of tiredness that will help getting to sleep. I don't know, 4 hours later. There is a lot of, I agree with Yizu, there's a lot of little adjustments that you can do in terms of easing yourself towards the sleep, and also making sure that where you sleep is really as good as possible, you know, dark and not too warm and not too cold, all these little things that we know that are important. But maybe that we tend to think, oh, you know, I've got bigger things to do. I can't bother about really having a dark bedroom, or I cannot change my bedding, and it feels like it's too trivial. But perhaps it's not. Actually, it might really help the quality of the sleep.
Yeah, definitely. I bought myself fancier bedding at the start of lockdown, and I don't regret it a bit. It's wonderful. One more question about sleep that's quite interesting is coming in from Mariam from YouTube, who said, I just had a baby and my sleep is no longer under my control. So what things can I do to keep my sanity with the several and long interruptions in the night, especially as we get to these darker days? So what about interrupted sleep? Izu, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, so unfortunately, from a survey that was done a while ago, people tend to say that babies are the number one factor that causes poor sleep, and that was quite funny and a bit this discouraging for people who aren't having who don't yet have a then if that's the case, some people would suggest to take a nap, especially interruptions at night. They are very not very bad for your brain, because for example, when I was talking about deep sleep, that's when people believe that you are clearing some toxic proteins, for example, during your deep sleep, and it's really important to clear those toxins. And if you get woken up during that process, you might feel quite confused and quite bad, so quite unrefreshed, for example. So I think if there's any concrete suggestions, is to take a nap when it's possible, and that's a really tough question that unfortunately it's the number one factor of poor sleep, according to papers. I'm not I don't have that experience myself, though.
If I can tag on to that, having a baby who just turned 1 year old, so and thinking of the recommendations of all the friends who went through it, so not just science is, but it goes back to what we were talking about, our frame of mind, is just remind yourself that it will pass. It will pass. And also just, I guess, focus on the more and more rewarding bits that come after a while. And somehow that, I think, slowly makes up for the general dizziness of sleep disruption, as well as many naps as you can.
Well, good. Thanks for trying to help out with that one, guys. I'm sure it's something everyone has to deal with in their own way eventually. Now, once you've got some good sleep, you're still going to want to try and do some work at home. So we've had a question in again from our pal EE9CLH, which says, how do I increase my productivity during winter when all I want to do is relax? Carrie, I don't know if you have any insights from Norway on that one.
Yeah, so Norway famously has wonderful work-life balance, actually. And at the university, it was not uncommon for people to take off early because the snow was very good for skiing conditions. So, but I actually think that there is some insight in there, because I think counterintuitively, one way to increase your productivity when we're working from home is to take more breaks and to schedule more breaks. And I think, during a normal workday, when you're going to an office, you have your time where you're commuting to and from work. You have that time that a coworker stops at your desk and is chatting. You have or you're walking to a meeting either down the hall or in another building, and you have all of these little things throughout your day that are very small breaks that you might not even realize are breaks that are happening. Whereas at home, I feel like we have this expectation that we're supposed to plop ourselves down in front of the computer at 9 a.m. and not move for 8 hours. And I actually think that that's not a good way to sort of be our peak most productive and to produce work that is of the highest quality. So I would recommend both some rituals to start and end the workday. So it could be a walk, it could be a morning cup of tea, it could be sort of clearing off your workspace if you're lucky to have one at home, to sort of start the day, and then likewise try to make a deliberate transition out of work, because we're not just working from home now, we're all living at work. And so trying to sort of create those boundaries can be quite useful. And then I would also say, schedule some real breaks into your day. Schedule a real lunch break, or say that every 2 hours you're going to get up and take a 15-minute walk, or make a cup of tea, or do something that's a little bit away from the computer. Because I think when we're trying to measure productivity as sort of hours with our butts in the chair, it can be really taxing on us to do that. And that giving ourselves the freedom to take a few more breaks can actually allow us to come to our work more refreshed. And also knowing that we have a break that we're working towards can sort of help us get more done. I don't know about you. I feel like my most productive time of the week is like Friday afternoon, when I'm frantically trying to finish stuff up before I can start my weekend. And I'm magically able to get more done in 2 hours than I got done, in 8 hours yesterday, because I'm really motivated by that break that's coming.
That's a really good one. Yeah, we've had a few comments in, as you can see in the bottom here, about that separation between work and life, and how, the commute used to kind of be the thing that separated those, but now we're just at home. You need a kind of separation. I don't know if you had any more tips, anyone, about, trying to vary our work balance, because it's just these four walls. And, I go for the same walk every lunchtime, and I very much like that walk, but it is the same walk every single time. How do you think we can vary our experiences at home? Carrie, seems like you have something to say.
Yeah, so I think, trying a different route, maybe that's the nicest walk that you've found, but are there any other walks that you can do? I also find, I constantly, like when I'm feeling stuck, I try to work from a different place in my house, even if it's just moving from this desk to that couch, like, which counts as a big commute these days. That try to make my days varied. So I know that, it really, there's a lot of variation in your job and how much flexibility you have. But if you do have some flexibility, you might have days that are more meeting heavy, where you try to schedule all your Zoom meetings, and then days where you sort of block off time for sort of deep work without meetings or without interruptions. So I find that kind of day-to-day variation in my schedule can be useful. And another thing I found useful is doing co-working Zooms, to have that little bit of social support and connection, where I'll just text a colleague and say, like, I am feeling so lazy today. Like, do you want to work on Zoom together for a few hours? And we'll just pull up Zoom, say hi, and then in silence work together, maybe check in once an hour. And it's sort of, it's a little bit of a sad approximation, but it's an approximation for that feeling of working around others who are working, and even just being near other people who are doing work can actually sort of change the atmosphere and sort of increase your motivation and productivity, I've found.
Martina, do you have any tips for productivity in the same place?
I guess one is to, following on things that we've said throughout the evening, is to use the kind of freedom and additional creativity that this strange setting gives us. So, schedule a meeting, but actually have a 40 minutes of yoga or cooking your dinner in the middle of the day at 11 a.m., which you would have never done. And you might think that decreases the amount you work, but actually it doesn't. It just increases the creativity, the variety, and it will motivate you more for what you're going to do. As Carrie was saying, is those final 2 hours, because you've stolen a little bit of time by doing something different. So that would be my thing. And the other thing is, I think as much as we try and find good solutions, we do miss the social connection, and the social connection that we have face to face and going to different places. So if we can, in some ways, from time to time, having that distance in person meeting, have a meeting while you're walking in a park, things that would have, sounded very unprofessional before, but actually I think might be really helpful to bring in. Even like in my team, we've just decided that once a month we're going to try and meet in person, because that face-to-face or being close, seeing to each other adds something to the connectedness.
Great. Well, we've got about 10 minutes left, and I want to get through a few YouTube questions. So the questions might be a bit more random from this point, but let's see what we've got. So John here says, what about vitamin D? So we've talked about light, but is vitamin D actually helpful in the winter to help you stay awake or pep you up a bit more? Sorry, I should say Izu, I don't know if you have any ideas of whether that affects sleep.
So that's a really hard question. My personal viewpoint is I've seen mixed results. So I'm not really convinced by the relationship personally. Maybe there's a more convincing study somewhere that I might have missed. But vitamin D has been, all over the media as well in relationship to COVID-19, and so I'm still a bit agnostic, and so what about them? I'm not sure. I'm not really convinced that there's a strong effect, at least that I know of. So maybe it's my ignorance here with sleep.
Carrie, I don't know if people ever took vitamin D in Norway, or if they just don't think about that the way we do.
So it's interesting because people in Norway do have all these sort of interesting sort of, theories about how they survive the winter. So some people swear by the sun lamps. Some people do swear by vitamin D. Some people swear by taking cod liver oil. Some people are like, oh, it's all about the festivals that Tromsø, holds that makes the winter fun. When I'm not researching winter, I actually study the placebo effect. And so I believe that if you find something that works for you and it's safe and it's not harmful, then by all means go for it, because the placebo effect is actually quite powerful. So, studies might be mixed about whether the vitamin D itself is what's causing the benefit. But if you have a practice or a supplement or something that you take that you feel is beneficial, that belief and that expectation in and of itself is powerful and is healing. So, as long as it's, not sort of harmful and it's not standing in the way of seeking other kinds of healthcare or doing other kinds of behaviors that are really important, I say if there's a supplement that you feel like is helpful to you, then go for it.
And there is evidence that vitamin D deficiency might be linked to depression. I mean, that is quite extreme to be vitamin D deficient. It doesn't mean that if your vitamin D is within the normal levels, adding to it boosts your mood. But if you're feeling low, that is definitely something to check.
Now, we've had a few questions in also about age. So, for example, are they young or middle-aged? Do they fare differently under kind of winter or lockdown? And should their approaches be different, say, to exercise or motivation or anything like that? Izu, maybe I'll go to you first. Does age affect sleep?
So yes, so there's there's some quite convincing evidence that when you are an older person have more disrupted sleep, but whether age itself affects sleep is still quite unclear. But with age comes several issues like cardiovascular like cognitive decline and dementias. So these kind of disorders have a really, really high impact on sleep, and unfortunately explored. So yes, age does have an effect on sleep, and perhaps we should really be careful about that. Yeah.
Harry, I don't know if you have any insights into how people of different ages did things in Norway in the winter.
Yeah, it's a good question. I find that, Norwegians are quite active. And so I was continually impressed by Norwegians, who seemed to be much older, who seemed super spry and fit and just love to do a quick pop up the mountain behind their house just after work. So yeah, I think, one important thing is sort of staying active. What that looks like might vary. Of course, during the winter, there might be increased concerns about slipping and falling or walking outside if you have physical disabilities. So, if you are able and not physically restricted, I would say, continuing to stay active and go outside, even if it's for short walks, is very useful and very powerful. And if it's not possible for you to do that for whatever reason, again, I think just making the winter special indoors and not, thinking of it as this time of year where you're stuck and forced to be inside, but as a time of year where you get to sort of embrace the coziness and live sort of in a calm, sort of peaceful, quiet contentment for a few months, rather than sort of this summertime, sunny, rambunctious, joyful kind of thing that we often really tend to value in our cultures, that sort of high arousal excitement, but to really chase that sort of low arousal, calm, peaceful well-being, which is, no less important or no less valid of a kind of well-being. It's just sort of different than how we often conceptualize happiness in our cultures.
Definitely. Martina, do you use or suggest different techniques for people of different ages, let's say adolescents?
Not necessarily. I think the beauty of sort of working with how we think is that it can be very flexible and adapted in different ways to each individual's experience. One thing that we know about adolescence is that it's a period when those social connections that might be different right now have actually a much stronger impact on how you perceive your well-being, your happiness, your level of activity. So the peer influence is actually shaping your brain, is shaping your values. And without that peer connection, we actually don't really know how that might impact even brain development, for example, for the current generation. But one thing that some studies have highlighted, there's a study that's run by Lindsay Dua, who's another researcher at Imperial, and she's worked with young people together with them, has done interviews to young people under lockdown, for example. And a really important thing that has come out is that through the difficulties, even for those who had mental health difficulties, there's a lot of creativity. And so while they were highlighting that they missed the social connections, they were finding that even if they could have some of it and a good quality of it, that could work and sort of make up for the other difficulties. So I think while adolescents might be a bit vulnerable right now, they also have a lot of resources, and in some way we can trust them building on those resources and being creative around it and learning a lot from their peers and peer-to-peer.
That's interesting. Thank you. Now we are very nearly out of time, so I wanted to quickly go around and ask you each for your one top tip for people to take away from this, and just a sentence or two. So Carrie, let's start with you.
Find a way to make this winter special. Figure out one or two things that you like about winter and really focus on that, and think about winter as having opportunities for those things that are special to this time of year.
Martina?
Use your mental imagery. Start the day with a snippet of a nice soothing or exciting, positive image to get you through the day.
The important tip for me is, we spend a third of our lives sleeping, so make sure that you put importance on your sleep and do things like exercise and things that make you sleep better. So sleep is very important.
Perfect. Well, thank you. I think this has been an absolutely stimulating evening. Unfortunately, time is just about up for tonight's discussion. So thank you so much for speakers and everyone who's joined us. For those watching on YouTube, I'm really sorry if we weren't able to get to your questions. There were lots of them, but a recording of this discussion will soon appear on the Imperial College London YouTube, so you can watch again or share with friends and colleagues whenever you want. A link will also be posted in the chat in a minute for evaluation form. You can tell us what you thought of this event. And don't forget, we've got a whole week of events on Wellbeing, so look out for those too. So it just remains for me to thank our panel, Kari Leibowitz, Martina Di Simplicio, and Izu Yu. And thank you for tuning in and providing some excellent questions for discussion. That's it from me. Have a good evening, everyone, and get some great sleep.